everybody. I'm Caryn Hartglass, and you are listening to It's All About Food. I've been broadcasting this program on the Progressive Radio Network since 2009, and it always surprises me, all the people that I talk to. I personally get a lot out of these conversations, and I hope you do too. And I know that today is probably going to be one of my favorites just because the person I'm about to introduce you to is, I have no words for you. So you're just one of the most amazing people, and I'm tearing up just thinking about it. So let's just get right to it. I'm speaking with Weil, one of the, I don't know, are you even human, Zoe?
Oh my gosh, Caryn. First of all, I just have to interrupt to say I'm deeply touched and very honored, and thank you. And, maybe we can just lay out all of my faults during this podcast so people will know that I am not only deeply human, but deeply flawed.
Yeah, well, only the really super special humans on this planet will say that. So you keep elevating yourself. Okay, just briefly, you have a great bio. I will post it on the page for this podcast, but you're the co-founder and president of the Institute for Humane Education. Briefly touch on what that means. And you're the author of 7 other books, including the one we're going to talk about today, The Solutionary Way, Transform Your Life, Your Community, and the World for the Better. And let's see, you have a great bio. You've done a bunch of TED Talks, TEDx Talks. You've won awards. You're the recipient of the NCSS Spirit of America Award that honors people who follow their conscience and act against current thinking in order to stand up for equity, freedom, and the American spirit of justice. I'm elevating the volume of my voice there because it is so important in this very moment, because nobody has a spine anymore in terms of the leaders that we have. And it goes on and on. You received a master's in Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, a master's and bachelor's in English literature from the University of Pennsylvania, and was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Valparaiso University. And I mean, you're just an amazing person. So thank you for joining me in this moment. Thank you for being you. And let's move on. I'm breathing. I always have to breathe. We all need to breathe, but sometimes it's important to be conscious of our breaths. I've been traveling the last few weeks, and I took the opportunity in my quiet moments to read The Solutionary Way. And I'm selfish, okay? I'll admit, I reached out to you because I felt like I personally needed you, and what I know about you and what I know about your words and what you write about. I need a strategy, and the strategy is in this book. So thank you for putting it into words. If you don't know about the book, everybody, it starts with a foreword by Jane Goodall. Okay? Is that enough?
That was quite an honor, I have to say.
And in your preface, you write, "A better world is possible. How can we build this better world? By becoming better solutionaries." What's a solutionary? I put your definition of a solutionary, which comes in the beginning of the book, but can you tell us what that is?
Yeah. So, I'm going to give you a little bit of a wonky definition, but we'll unpack it all. So a solutionary is somebody who can identify unsustainable, unjust, inhumane systems and transform them in ways that do the most good and the least harm for everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean all people, I mean animals, and I mean the environment, because we are all worthy of ethical consideration.
Okay. I like that. And
but
I wish
I can go on, like, if you want to say, like, because I think when people hear this word, they have a sense of what it means because it's got the word solution embedded in it. And most people tend to like the word, not everybody. Some people don't like made up words. I
Well,
think
they're
we,
only made up until they're accepted in our
I know, I
vocabulary.
know. And it needed to be a made up word. And the reason is because a solutionary is not synonymous with a problem solver. So somebody can solve the problem of damming a river or blowing up a mountaintop for coal removal, but they're not solutionaries because if you remember that definition I just gave, there's this ethical component embedded in being a solutionary to do the most good and least harm for everyone. And a solutionary is also not the same as a humanitarian. Now, obviously, we need humanitarians. There is a lot of suffering. There's a lot of destruction. We need people who are willing to help when help is needed. Humanitarians, however, are not addressing the causes of problems. So we need people to be humanitarians, and we need them to be solutionaries so that we don't perpetuate problems, so that we can really transform them and solve them so they don't persist.
My educational background, I got a bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering.
Oh, awesome.
Awesome.
But
Okay. I
there's
did
so
that for,
much that, like, just think about bringing that to being a solutionary. Think about
well,
what could be invented and brought to the world through that background.
we were taught to be problem solvers. And I was always very proud of that. I'm a problem solver. But the bottom line was always return on investment. And
Mhm.
that was what we were focusing on. It was a capitalistic perspective, how we can profit from whatever it is we're doing. And that solutionary requirement was not there. And I
Right.
always make an analogy of comparing it to when we were children and we would play with our toys and then we were supposed to clean up after our mess. And yet, when we were trained to become problem solvers, we never were taught to clean up our mess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And then on top of that, when your book came out about July last year,
Yeah.
2024. Um, about the same time, I spoke with Julie Guthman, who wrote another book called The Problem with Solutions. And in her book, she doesn't quite say it like you do, but I think you're both saying the same thing because she talks about all of these brilliant people in Silicon Valley who are coming up with these tech solutions that cause more problems than they
Mhm.
actually solve. And that's the problem with current solutions. Maybe she could have added a few adjectives in the title, but titles aren't
Well,
like that, right?
I mean, the work of becoming a solutionary includes cultivating critical thinking, systems thinking, strategic thinking, and creative thinking. And the reason why, and other forms of thinking, but these are the primary ones. And the reason why these thinking capacities are so important is so that we can avoid unintended negative consequences, because the systems in our world are so deeply interconnected that if we try to solve a problem and we don't truly understand the root and systemic causes of it, we haven't talked to the stakeholders, and that includes talking to the people who represent animals in the environment because they're stakeholders, and we haven't really considered the impacts of our solutions, then there are bound to be unintended negative consequences. They're almost unavoidable unless we do this hard work. And even then, that's why we say most good and least harm, as opposed to all good and no harm. It's hard to imagine and solve all of our problems causing no harm at all. But how can we minimize that harm and how can we maximize the good?
You're a teacher.
I am.
You are. And a humane educator and a solutionary. A lot of times when I hear about teachers, some people describe them as people that simply regurgitate what they've learned. And some teachers are better because they may be more entertaining or you may be able to connect with them. And some are absolutely boring. And, you just kind of get through the course, whatever it is. And I don't think you, Zoe, are just regurgitating. I think you've come up with something novel. And I know that you created the Institute for Humane Education with Ray Sikora. I'm sure there are many other people that have been part of this journey with you to help you put it all together. But there's some new stuff in here that's really important. And frankly, I wish that everybody was learning it. You've put all this out there, which is really wonderful. And you put it out last year. Well, you've been putting other books out and all this information out for quite some time. But the world has changed dramatically since January 20th, 2025. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about what you wrote in this book, and maybe you would have, I don't know, would you have written anything any differently? Or what we do with it now, because things seem even more urgent than before.
Yes. And which, as
Yes,
you know,
and I want to get to yes and in a moment.
I wouldn't make any big substantive changes in the book. What's challenging for me as a solutionary and a humane educator right now is that solutionary work is slow. Humane
Yes.
education is slow. My previous book before The Solutionary Way was The World Becomes So It. We teach educating a generation of solutionaries. That was the subtitle. So to create a generation of solutionaries is slow. And right now, things are coming at us so quickly, you know, not every week, not every day, but every hour, almost every minute of every day, something. And of course, living in the world as we do, we can know about things as they come out all the time. So the rate of acquisition of information has sped up, and the changes that are happening are coming so fast and furious. And so many of us who are distressed about what's unfolding want to be able to do something right now. And the right now things aren't necessarily solutionary. They don't address the root and systemic causes. They don't shift the systems. And people are really angry and afraid, and they're lashing out, and it's not necessarily productive, strategic. So I would say that my book is more important than ever right now. And people have to recognize that, you know, all the things that are currently unfolding in our government right now, they did not happen overnight. A tremendous amount of planning.
Over decades.
Yes, for decades. And then, you know, you look at Project 2025, I mean, that's a huge tome with very careful and strategic planning, and it's now being enacted in pieces. It did not happen overnight, but we want to respond overnight. And we have to be solutionary, all of us. And we have to be solutionary, and this is going to be hard for listeners. Some people might tune out as soon as I say this. We have to work with people who we think are our quote unquote enemies, who we think don't agree with us on anything. That's by and large not true. And and what is happening in our culture, and has been happening for quite some time, and seems like it happens in many places and very common, is that we frame issues in a binary way, in an either or way. We debate some manufactured issue or topic. And in the midst of debating it, we're not actually looking at the underlying problem. And the example that I give is actually from 2009, when, you know, you were starting this. I was in my car and I was listening to the radio, and there was a an advertisement for an upcoming debate at New York University as part of what was then called the Intelligence Squared series of debates. And the topic was whether or not the United States was responsible for Mexico's drug wars. And I heard that, and I remember just feeling deeply confused about why there would be this very narrow question that we would bring in experts to debate whether or not the US was responsible for Mexico's drug wars, that we wouldn't look at the underlying problem, which there are many of them, right? There's the drug wars themselves, there's the poverty and economic inequality and lack of education that leads to this as a business, the underlying problem of drug addiction and overdoses. I mean, there are so many underlying problems. And we could bring in experts to either discuss solutions to those underlying problems, or if we just really love the competitive debate format, they could still debate the solutions. But what are the solutions? So the way the Intelligence Squared series works is the audience listens and then they vote for who won. They vote for who won.
And that goes nowhere.
It goes nowhere. And so this binary framing is everywhere, right? It exists everywhere in our media, in our politics, in our education system. I mean, my son went to a school where participating in a debate like this is a requirement for graduation. Any of us can become part of this solution where we refuse to accept the framing. We start right away and we say, I'm not accepting that framing. What's the underlying problem? Can we agree on an aspect of that underlying problem? Could we work together? You know, we might not agree on everything. Do we agree on this problem? Could we work together to solve it? That is bringing what we call a solutionary mindset to the issues of our time. And we need that more than ever. So I guess that's my plug for saying, yeah, my book is really relevant now. It's even more relevant.
Well, I need this because I'm sure a lot of us are struggling because we all have family members and friends and colleagues who don't agree with us. And I am very progressive, very left, very blue. And I know that there's problems with all of our representatives, even the ones that we vote for, because they're not solutionaries. But I still think that selecting some are better than selecting others, and then we move forward. But still, I have people that I'm close with, friends and family, and I talk to friends who are struggling. I have a friend, she's always calling me about her brother because they just don't disagree, and she loves him, but she doesn't know how to communicate. And she's trying, but can't get through. And I need those tools. We all need those tools because, you know, unfriending people on Facebook is not a solution.
Maybe I should jump into what I've learned from improv comedy, because I've learned so many tools for being a solutionary from practicing improvisational comedy. And I feel like if we can bring these tools to our relationships and our neighbors and our communities, it will help so much for launching us in this more solutionary direction. So the first rule of improv comedy is to build relationships. So if you, people who are familiar with improv comedy know that actors come on stage, they get some suggestion from the audience, and they just create a scene. And so nothing is scripted, and they don't know what's going to happen. And the first thing that good improvisational comedians will do is they'll build a relationship with each other. So one might say to the other one, hey, Mom, I entered us into the parent-child acrobatic competition at school. So what did that actor do? That actor identified their scene partner as Mom. building that relationship. Now, if two actors just get on the stage and one says, "Hey, how's it going?" And the other's like, "Hey, it's going, I don't know, I'm kind of depressed right now." Like, you don't know, there's no relationship. The audience is waiting for there to be a relationship. We need to build relationships, and not just with the people we already have relationships with, not just with people who agree with us. We need to build relationships with people who have different perspectives and views, because it's only in understanding others and actually caring about them that we will stop vilifying each other and creating this binary world. So the next thing that improvisational comedians will do is they'll embrace this concept of yes and, which we've already touched on just briefly. So that other scene partner, in response to the opening line of, "Hey, Mom, I've entered us into the parent acrobatic competition at school," might say, "That's fantastic, Brian. We can wear the pink polka dot leotards that I purchased on eBay." So what did that scene partner do? They said yes to the role of being mom. They didn't say, "I'm not your mother. I don't do acrobatics." No, they embraced and they said yes to this role. And then the "and" part is adding to the scene. So they help the scene go forward. And the audience is having a good time right now because the audience is appreciating the relationship. They're appreciating that the scene is moving forward. They're ready for more. So how can we yes and each other? Most of the time, when somebody has a different perspective than us, there is something we can say yes to. Even in one of the most contentious, polarizing issues of our time, the issue of abortion rights, people who are pro-life and pro-choice can probably both say yes to the goal of having as few girls and women face an unwanted pregnancy as possible. They can both say yes to that. And then there's an "and," right? Like, they're not going to agree on aspects of whether abortion should be safe and legal and rare, or whether it should be criminalized. They may never agree on that, but they can agree on this. And there's an "and" to be found. I know that might sound Pollyannish or simplistic, but we can find these yes ands all the time and not hate each other and find ways to work together for common goals that would be good. I mean, wouldn't it be great if as few girls and women faced an unwanted pregnancy as possible?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Okay, so that is yes and. And then the last rule of improv comedy that I'll mention is bring the love. So most of the time in improv comedy, you don't see people creating arguments on stage and yelling at each other, and you see them bringing love because it's just generally more fun to watch. And I mean, this isn't across the board, right? There's plenty of like comedians who, like Larry David is the first person who comes to mind, who's the exception that proves the rule. But for most of us, we bring the love. So what does that have to do with our lives? I was in India in January at this incredible experience called Gandhi 3.0, where 40 people from around the world are invited to come together and to steep ourselves with Gandhian principles and then bring them forward in our lives. It was the most heart-expanding 9 days of my life. It was incredible. And Gandhi, over and over again in his life, he cultivated love and refused to hate anybody, ever. And he even wrote about this, like, for 40 years, he has not experienced hatred for another being. He's experienced hatred for evil and injustice, but not for another being. Gandhi used love as the vehicle for creating change. We need to do that too. And we are so consumed right now with fear and anger and hatred. So I'm just going to give an example of why it's so hard to truly cultivate love. So I'm going to ask everybody who's listening to imagine themselves driving on the highway. You're going 70 miles an hour. There are a lot of cars. They're all moving, right? You're heading in your direction. You're going 70 miles an hour, lots of cars by your side. Everything's going smoothly. And now imagine that somebody cuts you off. What is your reaction? Okay.
Anger.
Anger, right? I mean, you might lay on your horn, you might flip the bird, you might swear.
Yep.
You are mad. Heart's racing. And you're understandably mad, right? Like they may have threatened your life and other people's lives, right? You're understandably mad. But here's my question. Up until that moment that that person cut you off, were you feeling love for all of the people driving beside you, going 70 miles an hour with lots of cars and driving safely? Probably not. We do not go through our lives feeling love for all of the people who are supporting us on our journeys, whether they know it or not, in countless ways. We're not experiencing love. We're not experiencing gratitude. We're, just easily angered, easily afraid. And this is biological and psychological. This is who humans are. But to the degree that we can actively cultivate love, actively bring the love, that's the task. And Gandhi and other leaders have shown that it can work. Gandhi worked for so many decades, tirelessly, constantly, doing the inner work so he could do the outer work of freeing his country from British rule using only nonviolent methods. I mean, imagine that. Like, we didn't do that here in the United States. We had a Revolutionary War. Ending untouchability, like a caste system that had been so deeply ingrained in a country for thousands of years, or among a people for thousands of years, ending that through the power of love. Calling the people who had been defined as untouchables, Harijans, children of God, transforming how people saw each other through love. And the word that Gandhi used was satyagraha. And satyagraha is sometimes translated as nonviolent resistance, but it's much more than that. Satya means truth. Agraha means adherence or firmness. So it was adherence and firmness to the truth. And love was the truth. And it's not that Gandhi was never angry. But what Gandhi did was he took his anger and he used it, he transformed it to use that anger as a fuel through which love can emerge in service of truth.
You said a few words, work and working tirelessly. Those are the things that came to mind. And I mentioned before about studying to be a chemical engineer, and one of my favorite things that I learned were the 3 laws of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics did not make any sense to me. I got a decent grade. I remember talking to 2 of my favorite professors years later about the course, and they were like, we didn't know what we were talking about either. It's just so out there, a lot of what we learn. But the second law of thermodynamics is my favorite. And there are simple ways to describe it. Entropy is always increasing. Randomness is always increasing. Chaos is always increasing. And in order to bring order to chaos, we have to put in energy. We have to do the work. This is a universal law of life in the universe. And right now we're experiencing tremendous chaos. And we have to put in the work to bring order, to bring compassion, to bring kindness, to make this world a better place. But do people want to do the work? And I don't want to bring us down. I'm looking for inspiration. I want to do the work. But there are many phrases and slogans people put out there about people not really wanting to make change until it affects them personally. We have to really suffer before we're going to get in line to make change. What say you?
Let's redefine work. My experience is that the cultivation of love, the effort to become a solutionary, is deeply good for me as an individual. Living in a state of fear and rage does not feel good.
It does not feel good.
Living in a state where we feel disempowered and we don't feel like we have any agency does not feel good. So for those who are listening who are like, well, I'm imagining people who are listening are actually eager to work. But is the work going to be strategic and loving? And really look at the underlying systems. I feel like to the degree that I have done the work that I've done in my life is the degree that I have been so deeply enriched by the community of fellow humane educators and solutionaries on the path with me. I've met the most amazing people. To the degree that I do the inner work of cultivating love, I am more joyful, I am happier. More people are drawn to me and to work with me who are joyful, wonderful people as well. And then that feels great, right? Like there's so many win-wins in this. So there's a few questions I think are really useful to ask ourselves. The first one is, what are the issues that most concern you? Now, right now, we've always had the issues that concern us. And now there's layers and layers of other issues on top of it. But really identifying what most concerns me right now. I've been asking myself that question. I'm writing a blog post over the last 2 days about this very question for myself. And then the next question is, what am I good at? And the third question is, what do I love to do? Because if we can combine what we're good at with what we love to do, and then put that in service of the issues that we care about and the problems we want to solve, we're going to live incredible, meaningful, rich, purposeful, contributing lives. So when you said, you studied chemical engineering, I'm like, oh, how cool is that, right? We imagine taking, scientists taking their knowledge, assuming they love doing it too, and directing it towards solving real problems, not just making a profit, but solving real problems. Sometimes both can happen simultaneously. We can solve real problems and make a profit too. But any of us who are thinking about like, what's my solutionary path? Ask yourself those 3 questions. And I think I'm going to just jump into talking about how at the Institute for Humane Education, we're bringing this to the K-12 school systems. We're in 30 countries, and we're training teachers to use a solutionary framework of identifying problems, investigating them thoroughly, innovating solutions, and implementing their solutions, those are the 4 phases of the solutionary framework. We're training these teachers to integrate this process into their curriculum, whatever their curriculum is, whatever ages they're teaching. And what's happening is that students, they come alive. They get to address issues they care about. They get to take their emerging literacy, numeracy, and scientific academic skills and apply them to things that they care about. They get to solve real world problems. They get to feel empowered. They get to learn that they have agency. They get to experience what happens when you solve a problem and then take on a bigger problem and then iterate and learn from it, take on a bigger problem. This is why we need to educate a generation of solutionaries. The reason I wrote the Solutionary Way is because we can't wait to educate a generation of solutionaries. We all have to become solutionaries. So I wrote this book for everybody. And my particular solutionary strategy in the world is through education, because I believe it's the root system underlying all other societal systems. And that if we can educate a generation of solutionaries, we will watch a more just, sustainable, peaceful world unfold.
I remember talking to you about this over a decade ago. We spoke on this program about 14 years ago.
Yep.
And a few times we also did a little film of you at the Catskill Animal Sanctuary. But the key thing that I got out of it was empowering young people to know that they can make a difference and they can solve problems. Because we all feel like that we can't do anything, that the problems are so big and so out of our control. What can we possibly do? And it's very overwhelming. And you mentioned in the book being a fan of Star Trek. And I often think about Spock and his Vulcan mind meld. And I wish I had a way to do this mind meld with people I want to communicate with, because there's so much that I want to share. There's so many books I've read, so many people I've spoken with, and I want to share that. And I suppose I have to hear what the other person has to say as well.
And you have to, but more than that, you have to want to.
I have to want to, and that's so hard. And I know that the Vulcan mind meld is dangerous because it doesn't always work properly and can cause damage. So when we're sharing information and getting information back, we have to be gentle and we have to be careful. But it is a big problem because there is so much understanding what the other person has been through to get to where they are, and then trying to help them because we want them to think like us. But I know that we kind of have to compromise and meet in the middle somewhere. That's such a big problem, such a big challenge.
It is. And, I'm just going to repeat that there are things that we're going to agree on. There are problems we're going to both agree are problems, and we can solve them across divides, and we can solve them by collaborating with a wide range of stakeholders. And, one of the things that I've noticed in recent years is what used to be like really far left and what used to be really far right are now like bending and sometimes
Meeting again. And
it's very, I think we need to realize that we think in this way in binary terms too. We're like they're opposite ends of a spectrum. But there's so many spectrums and there's so many areas where people agree and disagree. It's quite interesting to watch the shifts that are happening. But we got to talk to each other and we have to want to talk to each other. And I have to say about Mr. Spock, which is completely unrelated to this, but Mr. Spock introduced me to the concept of vegetarianism when I was 13.
Mr. Spock introduced you to vegetarianism. Wow.
Yeah. And, here, who was it on the original Star Trek series who was vegetarian? It wasn't the humans who had emotions. It was the logical Vulcan who thought it
Hmm.
was illogical to cause pain and suffering to other species for no other reason than we liked
Wow.
the taste of them.
Right. Mind blown.
Yeah.
Totally illogical. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this show is called Us All About Food. And even though we talk about a wide variety of subjects, I always bring it back and connect the dots to food. And the challenging thing, one of the challenging things for me right now is my mission has always been trying to find ways to reduce pain and suffering, especially for non-human animals, the voiceless. And I focus on food, and I like to make healthy, delicious food and put it in people's mouths and make them realize, oh, I don't need to torture animals. I can eat this food. And it's been a long, hard journey. And I know personally my work has made some impact on a handful of people, but it takes decades. Sometimes I have people close to me that come to me 30 years later. Oh, they just tuned in to what I had to say a long time ago. It takes so much time. And now things seem to be weightier and more challenging. I'm still sticking to my path, but there's all this other stuff. There's all this other chaos, this noise around me that's making things a little more challenging. But it is all about food. And I just wanted to bring that in.
Food systems. I mean, I talk a lot about food systems in the book because it's one of the arenas where if we can make changes, the far-reaching impacts are extraordinary. And it's one of the most, our current food system is, if not the most, one of the most unsustainable, destructive, unhealthy, violent systems. And we can change it. It's just not that hard to change it. And, you know, I'm somebody who became vegan 36 years ago, and vegetarian before that. And, you know, it's so much easier now. It's so much easier.
Sure.
And that reminds me that things have changed and shifted, and, you know, not as many people ask me where I get my protein as used to.
Although it still happens.
It does still happen. But I recently had the honor of being named the 2024 plant-powered crop of the year in the world. So that that should be a reminder that little 63-year-old me, who's been vegan all these years, can do hard fitness things.
I'm glad you brought that up because I follow you on Facebook. And I love everything you have to say. And occasionally I've caught a few things that really were a wows to me, like your journey with CrossFit and your ability to have an osteoporosis diagnosis and then increase the density in your bones. And everybody should be talking about that.
I know.
And we don't get that ever.
No, not only that, I mean, the endocrinologist who I saw after I got this diagnosis that I was on the verge of osteoporosis, you know, she had said, well, we can put you on drugs. Like, there's really nothing else to do. But I knew there was something else to do. And I joined a CrossFit gym. And then a year later, I get another bone scan and I've regained a significant amount of bone mass. A year later, I was like on the verge of normal. I've never been normal in any way in my life, let me just say. But I had a scheduled appointment with the endocrinologist, and there was really no reason for me to keep it, right? I had the bone scan. I was doing what, but
I
decided I'm going to keep the appointment because I want to be her poster child, and I want her to tell every one of her other patients this can be done. And so that's why I kept the appointment, even though it was going to cost me money to like go see her. I wanted to drive home this point, and I talked to her about it, and she's like, most people aren't going to do what you did. Most people aren't going to be willing to do it. I know that, right? I know like most people who I have taught about the cruelties in factory farming and the environmental destruction, all of the issues, don't change their diet. Most people do not. That's the reality. And this is, I'm going to circle back to why it's so important to be a solutionary. We need to change the systems, because if we're trying to change people's biological and psychological deepest experience as a human being, that works for some of us, does not work for most of us. But if we change the systems, right? If you went to the grocery store or a restaurant and all that was offered to you was plant-based and cell-based versions of the meat and dairy and eggs that you love, and the cost was comparable, the taste was the same, you'd be happy to eat that, right? And then one day you would look back on eating factory farmed animals, slaughterhouse animals, and you'd be horrified, and you would think that was awful, the way we feel about slavery now. Like, that's awful. We didn't think it was awful for hundreds, thousands of years. You change the system. Sometimes we think we have to change our mindsets and our worldviews and our values and our beliefs first. But often if you change the systems and it becomes easy to live more sustainably, humanely, justly, then our mindsets and values can change because they're not out of conflict. They're not out of alignment. They're no longer in conflict with our behaviors. So solutionaries can change those systems. You know,
Well, good for
that's
you
why
for going to your doctor and educating her. And we need that in part of the system change for medical doctors to let people know, even if they think they're not going to do it, let them know the number one option for you is lifestyle change. That's the number one. Now, I understand you may not want to do that, and I have drugs and things that could assist, but they are not going to solve your problem. And they don't do that because they assume right away people don't want to have that information. But in order to make the system change, a few people will get the message, a few people will change, and then we gain momentum. So doctors need to do that. Is your doctor doing that?
I hope she is now. Yeah, I hope she is now. And we also have to make it easy, right? So why is CrossFit, why has it been the fastest growing fitness program in the world for, the last 15 years? And there's this kind of alchemy to it where every day is different, so you don't get bored. You have a coach who's making sure you're doing things in a way that you're not going to injure yourself. You have a community that's cheering you on. You see results very quickly, and those results then feed on themselves. So it's this just incredible recipe that makes people who start CrossFit become often kind of culty about it. In fact, there's this joke. If you're a vegan and a CrossFitter, what do you tell people first? Which I think is hilarious because I'm a vegan CrossFitter. And now I get to tell people all at once by saying, I'm the plant-powered CrossFitter of the year. I get it in with one sentence.
I'm applauding you. So inspirational.
Thank you.
And when we eat better and take care of our bodies, and when we exercise and we feel strong physically, we have more clarity, we can think better, and we can be better solutionaries as a result. It's all a win, right?
All the wins. I mean, that's how I feel about educating a generation of solutionaries, right? It's good for the kids. It's good for schools. It's good for communities. It's good for our world. Just like it. And we've partnered. So I live in Maine. That's where the Institute for Humane Education is headquartered. And we partnered with the Maine Department of Education, and we're educating hundreds of Maine teachers who are bringing the solutionary
Mm.
framework to their students. And, there's nothing you have to believe. There's no behaviors you have to adopt. All you do is you follow this framework of identifying problems that concern you, investigating them thoroughly, innovating solutions, implementing your solutions. That's simple and that challenging. I just want to say that if anybody's listening who's like, I want to do this too. I want to be a humane educator. I want to be a solutionary and I want to be a humane educator. I want to build this movement. We have a graduate program with Antioch University, and we have a Master of Arts, Master of Education, a certificate program, and a concentration in humane education in an EDD, a doctoral program in education with Antioch. So and it's all online, we have students from around the world. So if anybody's thinking, man, I want to really dive in and learn these methods and be a humane educator, come visit our website, humaneeducation.org, and we have loads of free materials too, but it's sort of like soup to nuts. Free materials, like you can find the solutionary framework right there. You can go on your solutionary path, and you can go all the way to the doctoral level with this work.
Wow, you have tools for us.
Yes.
Tools that we can use, but they do take time, and change takes time. And so somehow we have to find the patience and the strength to weather through this discomfort that we're going through right now. And it's affecting some people in very powerful ways. I mean, some people are dying, just put it out there. But somehow we need to do the work and find the patience in order to make things better for all life on Earth. There was just one more topic I wanted to bring up before we go, because I just read it this morning and it was a major eye roll for me. But there was an article in the BBC about food waste and how some small towns in France are giving people chickens. And that's supposed to help with food waste because they can feed their chickens their kitchen scraps. I was like rolling my eyes, laughing, and thinking about, avian flu and all these things. And I'm thinking, okay, what a sweet story that is. No. And why isn't it so? Because we're not understanding what the real problems are. And you talk about food waste in your book too. There's just so much packed in this one little book.
Yeah, this is one of the, so we have a choose your own adventure curriculum that we've designed that teachers can use with their students on food waste. And you can't get through that curriculum without learning that the majority of food waste happens in animal agriculture. It happens by feeding such a huge proportion of feed crops, grains and legumes, to animals to produce a small portion of meat, dairy, and eggs back. Like that is the biggest arena of food waste. It's not what we throw out because, it's buried in our crisper in our refrigerator, or because of what restaurants throw out. So food waste is exactly one of those topics that is so much more complex than what we think it is when we first hear about it. And the solutions require that we understand the primary causes of food waste. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
So many things to talk about, and so many things to mind meld about. But we're at the end of the program. So Weil, thank you for joining me. I also want to mention you have a blog in Psychology Today.
Yes, and at the Institute for Humane Education, we have a blog as well. So as I said, I'm working on this blog right now about what I think is the biggest problem in the world right now. So
that's a light topic. Okay, I can't wait to see what you come up with. Okay, again, thank you so much for joining me. You talked about love, and I just want to say that I love you and all that you are doing. Such important work. And let's redefine work. Work makes us feel good when it's the work that we believe in, that's meaningful,
And that we're meant to do.
and that we're meant to do.
And
Yeah.
you're doing the work you're meant to do, Caryn. So thank you.
Thank you. I was just thinking about that while you were talking about it because I'm also a performer. I haven't done the engineering stuff for quite some time, and I don't know if I've talked about this on this program yet, but I'm working on an opera about Emma Goldman, where I'm playing Emma Goldman, the anarchist and activist from, some 100 years ago. And so I'm using my singing and my performing to share messages that are really important to me. And it's just blowing me away because I knew so little about her, and now learning about her and the things that she fought for are so current today.
That's
So
awesome.
it's powerful.
Yeah, you're doing what it means to be a solutionary. You're combining what you care about with what you
Exactly.
love to do and what you're good at. Perfect.
I get it. I get a good grade from Zoe.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much again for joining me on It's All About Food and for being who you are. So
Thank
Weil, the author
you.
of The Solutionary Way, transform your life, your community, and the world for the better. Get the book, read the book, follow this person, and we'll all work better. Enjoying the work.
Thank you, Caryn.
Okay, everybody have a delicious week.